Welcome to the Read Your Keys podcast. I am your host, Joe Lopez. If you are enjoying the content, please like, subscribe, squish, smash, and pulverize those follow, like, and subscribe buttons. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. And today I have a returning guest, my friend, Dovid Feldman. You can find him on Twitter at Dovid Feldman and on his website, dovidfeldman.com. He's helping people build great marriages. Dovid, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you so much, Joel. It's always a pleasure to be here. I love chatting with you.
Yeah, and I was looking at your bio profile on Twitter, and I thought it was really interesting because I think this is a really interesting statement. A great marriage is not made by who you marry, but by who you are. And I think there could be lots of, back and forth on that statement. But yeah,
Sure,
I think that's a great. It is a great statement, David. And you're
Thank
very
you.
wise, so that's why it's like, man, let's hear about this.
Oh, I mean, of course, this is all off the cuff, but
Appreciate off the cuff. That
yeah,
we're all
appreciate
off
off the cuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're off the cuff, right? Life is off the cuff. I've been married for almost 30 years now. I think it's like 28, 29. I could figure it out if I wanted to. And my marriage just keeps getting better and better and better and better. And I really feel, and I was just thinking about this last night. It's so funny that you're bringing this up, but I really feel that the reason why it's getting better is because I'm getting better. I'm becoming a better husband and a better man and a better father and a better family man. And the more I do that, the better my marriage becomes. And the journey of marriage is so personal. And I was thinking to myself, is the reason why my marriage get better is because my wife is better? And I was thinking to myself, I don't even know if my wife's gotten better. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I don't even know. I'm not even paying attention to that. Mm-hmm. I just know that I love her and I love being married more and more. And that's because I'm growing and becoming more appreciative and happy with being married. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what that opening statement about my Twitter feed is all about.
What do you think it was that was, because at the beginning of a relationship, right, it's the newness, I'm going to put my best foot forward all the time, and it's very easy to do so, because this is very interesting to me too, because okay. At the beginning it's very easy, you're enamored, it's new, there's not so much of the stress of kids and life pulling at you, so you can give your best effort. But then there is the kind of the stresses of life, all that thing starts to pull at you and things like that, and you can start to take your wife for granted, because I think that kind of happened to me for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, so like what we're so it's easy in the beginning, right? Because it's new. But now you're almost 30 years down the road, plus whatever you dated, plus the stresses of like you have kids, things like that.
The list is kids.
Yeah, you would, most people would be like, oh, the honeymoon stage is at the beginning because it's new.
Oh yeah, that's way gone.
Yeah, that's way gone. But now you're 30 years and you're like, it's the best it's ever been, and I believe you. So I like, what were the things that you worked on yourself for to feel like go to bed, because that's winning at life to me, to be able to sleep and be like, man, my marriage is the best 30 years down the line, because that's what I would like. And in 40 years to say the same thing from like, oh man, this is the best that's ever been. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, we can, I'm not sure if we want to do the entire trajectory from day one to day 30.
But like even like 10 years ago, right? Because you were probably already of the same mindset, things of 10 years ago that you are today for the most part. I'm assuming here.
Well, I break down marriage into this. This will be an interesting conversation, and I've never really done this officially, so I'll do this officially now. But I break down marriage into, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Okay, there's 4 phases, I would say, in marriage. Okay, the first you mentioned, which is the honeymoon phase. Okay, so that can last anywhere from let's say 6 months hopefully it lasts a lot longer than
Yeah,
that.
yeah, for
Let's say
sure.
6 months to about 4 years. Where a guy's still like a puppy, just totally in love with his wife, doesn't see anything wrong,
Hmm.
everything's fine, great sex, just everything's just perfect.
Hmm.
Then there's an if and this is usually the case if there's children involved, then there's what I would call a plateau phase, right? I'll put years to this as an example. Let's just say from the years of 30 to 40, there's like a plateau phase. Okay. And
Hmm.
what I mean by plateau phase is that you and your wife are so busy building this family together. So you've got kids and you're trying to raise money for a home and you're trying to establish yourself in a job and in a career. And she's dealing with the children and maybe her career and some other things that she's working on. You're just kind of coexisting in
Hmm.
this family life and you're not really paying attention so much. You may have had some great patterns to begin with. So
Hmm.
let's say you guys have a decent sex life or you have date nights or you have a good rapport, you can connect with each other emotionally well. That's really nice. And that kind of just like floats with you for like the next
Hmm.
10 years or so. And again, for everybody, the phase durations are going to be different. And then there's what I call like the great reset, so to speak. And this happens to men in particular in their early 40s, usually before the age of 45, where um, things shift for us. Like all of a sudden we look back and I wouldn't necessarily say this is a midlife crisis, but it could be. I never correlated it with midlife crisis, but it could be correlated with midlife crisis. Where all of a sudden we look back and say, hey, wait a second, what am I doing all this for? Does she really love me? Am I getting out of this marriage that which I want? Is she giving to me the way I want?
Hmm.
Right? And you start feeling, at least a lot of the men that I work with, and I know I went through this phase myself, where you start questioning like the whole relationship. And oftentimes this is coupled with your wife also kind of feeling a little bit bitter and resentful towards you.
Hmm.
And maybe she's not speaking to you the way she used to speak to you. Maybe she's not giving to you intimately the way she used to. Maybe there's been a lack of sex in the relationship. Maybe there's no more affection. And maybe things have just come to this crescendo where you feel like you're what I call mingles, which is married singles.
Hmm.
You're living in the same house.
Hmm.
Maybe there's some intimacy there, but you don't feel connected anymore. And things begin to break down. This is where a lot of men call me and talk to me. And I say, she just doesn't look at me anymore. She just goes to her room and reads. After she puts the kids to bed, she'll just go right into her room and grab a book or watch TV. And she's not. When I ask her to go out on a date, she's not interested. Or when we do go out, all she does is complain. Or, I mean, the stories can go. I could keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Hmm.
think you understand what's going on here. And that's like a breaking point for many people. Where they're just totally at wit's end on what to do, how they feel, how to bring back the connection. Then there's what I call the fourth phase, which is rebuilding. And this rebuilding phase is when men learn how to actually be a man. And what I mean by that is not about going to the gym, even though that's extremely important, and not about changing your diet, which is extremely important, and not about making more money, which is extremely important. And
Hmm.
all those things are great things, and
Hmm.
we should all do those, and everybody should be very successful in those things. But what I mean is when we start looking at our relationships in a more masculine manner. And what I mean in particular is that we recognize that a woman's love for us is not going to be the same as our love for her. And we embrace that. And we recognize that we are the givers and she is the receiver.
Hmm.
And we are the source of joy and she's the one that amplifies the joy.
Hmm.
And um, we are the unending stream of love, affection, connection inside this relationship. And that we do that not only as a gift to her to be that, but also as a gift for ourselves. And when you're able to do that, when you're able to say, hey, wait a second, I want to wake up every day and be in love with this woman next to me. I don't care. I don't care what's going on for her. I care what's going on for her because I care about her. But how she feels about me and the relationship, that's not affecting me personally. I only want what's best for her. And you start becoming that man. And I know you're a religious person, so I like to compare this to the way God has a relationship with us, right? Just like God's love for us is an unending stream of acceptance and love and connection and giving and just blessings. When we can learn how to do that in our own lives to the people whom have put us as responsible for them, like our wife and our children, even our communities, it's transformative.
Yeah.
You become a completely different person, and you derive such pleasure. You derive such pleasure from your wife and kids, from your community, from your life.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a lot there, but I think, as you become a man, like there's really no gifts that my like wife or kids can give to me that really like, it's like, oh, you thought of me, thanks. But like, it really is a lot of joy to like give to your kids, or to like, hey, I found this great thing for my wife, I'm going to give it to her. I'm excited about giving that. Like, I'm kind of hard to shop for, because I don't there's nothing that I really like it's like, oh, you found some obscure book, or like, oh, I got to watch the game, like thank you for doing that, or like you took me a meal. But other than that, like I really don't care. But I think it's really important what you said too, because God is physical, but also in the spiritual, and I think that you made that connection too, right? Because when a man and woman make love, right, the man is the one that is giving, and the woman receives. That is the physical manifestation of it. But you're also talking about, in life, just to be that pour. And I remember last time we talked to you, you had used the analogy of the spigot. You just open up the water and it just pours out. And every now and then, when I'm having a tough time, I will think of that, Dovid. That is one of those things where it's like, yeah, because it's really human nature to not, like, I don't want to. I'm upset right now. I don't want to give.
What's in it for me? Yeah, or what's in it for me? Or how come I'm willing to give to her, but she's not willing to give back to me? And those are normal thoughts and normal feelings, And it's when you learn to see, my methodology in general is that, and I learned some of this when I was in therapy school, is as men, we set what I call our bottom lines. Okay, we have what's called, I have this exercise on my website called the must-have marriage. And basically what that's about is, can I talk about this? Is this something
yes, please.
Okay,
please.
Yeah. So it's basically what's called the must-have marriage. And basically what we do is we set our bottom lines in 5 different areas. So for me, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a pyramid. And so on the bottom, it's like breathing. Like on the top is like full enlightenment, right? So, okay. So we do the same things with our marriage. It's a great exercise. If it's just on my website. But what you can do is you set for yourself what your base priorities are. And what I say must have, that means like if any of these 5 levels of connection are violated, it's a massive red flag in your relationship. So for me, for instance, as an example, the lowest level would be trust, i.e. in terms of marriage, it's not a business trust, it's fidelity, right? It's like the lowest level, because that is the definition for most people. I'm not talking about today's new ways of being married, but for most people, fidelity is the definition of marriage. What else is there if it's not that thing? Okay. So that would be number 1. The second one for me, as an example, would be responsibility. And when I say responsibility as a married person, I'm usually referring to responsibility with my children. Meaning, so for instance, on the bottom level, fidelity, if that was violated, that's a must-have for me. If that's violated, the marriage is no longer a marriage; it's over, right? And then the next level, which is an example, would be responsibility. And for me, it's my children. If I didn't feel safe with my wife and the kids, like if I thought, let's just say, if I lived in Florida or it's summertime here in Chicago, and heaven forbid, my wife is the type of person to leave the kids in the car while she went grocery shopping or something like that, I couldn't stay married to such a person. Like if I couldn't go to work and not know that the kids were alone in the bathtub, there's no marriage. Right? It's a divorce, and then I take them for as much custody as I can, right? And the next one is like kindness, right? So if there's no kindness inside the house, if it's constantly a war zone, if there's constant fighting, name calling, stuff like that, it's not a marriage. In any case, it keeps going up. Next one's intimacy, and the last one is respect. Okay, so that's just mine. You can create your own, whatever your must-haves are in a marriage. But once we create those boundaries and we sit there and we think to ourselves, okay, how do I define what behaviors fall within this pyramid and what's not? once we do that, we have a blueprint of things which are going to ruffle my feathers. If it's not on this marriage pyramid, it's not ruffling my feathers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna let it go. It didn't happen, you know. It doesn't mean I don't get irked about things, but I can quickly say to myself, okay, dinner wasn't ready, or the bill was too high, she overspent over here, or maybe I felt disrespected over there, da 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 da. But if it's not falling out of my marriage pyramid, it's off the. I'm not gonna fight about this at all.
Yeah.
And then the rest is the opposite. The rest is me constantly giving. So you have these two things. You've got the boundaries in your marriage that you set for yourself, and then you have the positive flow of love and connection that you're willing to give, assuming that everything else is kosher, so to speak, which it 99.9% of the time is. So between these two dynamics, you have a lot of space that you can just not think about the little things that bother you, not think about, oh, I also didn't get or something. Just leave that crap to the side. Give anyway as much as you can, and you will see that, the more you behave in that manner of giving and loving and happy, it's going to be infectious to your whole house.
So this is an exercise just for the man by himself, or does he do it with his wife also, and she comes up with her 5 colors, or like you said?
No, do not do it with her.
Okay. Well, I mean, like hey, you create. Sometimes a lot of times it'll be like, hey, I'm doing my 5 pillars, and
love language or something like this, right?
Yeah,
right.
things like that, and it's like, hey,
Yeah.
let's discuss it. But this is solely you as the man. You need to come up with your thing and then communicate it or walk it out.
Yeah, I feel like it's more like a masculine type exercise. I don't think women's brains work this way, where they set these intellectually thought out boundaries. I think women just kind of intuit how they feel about things, and I would not structure it in some sort of organized pyramid type way. It's more of a man's, in my opinion, it's more of a man's type thing.
It's interesting though, because having this conversation with you, I had a conversation with Tyler Tote. I don't know if you know Tyler, but he has 5 family values that they kind of operate within, and just like the more that you talk to, family men like yourself and Tyler, it's like these are things that's like, oh, these are great tools to incorporate to be able to have a happy, or just a good home, a good marriage, and then to be able to go out from there. There was another thing that kind of came to my mind when you were talking about just the giving and the pouring. There was a movie, I don't know, it's kind of a religious movie. It's called Fireproof. It came out like 10 years ago.
Okay.
I think Kirk Cameron was the one that did it, but their marriage was they were going to get divorced, but then he kind of does like this challenge basically where he just loves on his wife, regardless of what her reaction, positive, negative, neutral, did not matter. It was just about him just loving her, even though she was not being loving to him. It was just, so it's like, I think it's that same kind of picture that you had painted. I think that movie had kind of painted where it's like, hey, just this giving. And so I mean, it's not the best acting and things like that, but the point of the movie was to be that spigot, like you said.
Yeah.
I think I might have to rewatch it now that I have that in my mind now with the spigot. But it's that same principle. So you might want to check it out too, just for that principle, to kind of see that in action. I thought was
in Hollywood.
Well, this is like
outside
off Hollywood, right? It's like Kirk Cameron. I don't remember if you remember him from like Growing Pains or whatever.
No.
That's him.
Well, there's a funny story that I have with I put men that work with me. I put them on what's called, and even if you follow me on Twitter, you're familiar with the Friday Flowers thing, where every Friday I post on Twitter that you should go out and buy your wife a small bouquet of flowers. I usually recommend under $15. This isn't like a super Valentine's gift. It's a small bouquet, and you give it to her. So sometimes, when men first sign up for my programs, this and that, they say, I said to them, okay, you got to start doing this. And like, oh no, she's not gonna. I can't bring her flowers. And I said, you have to bring her flowers. Oh no, she's gonna get up. She's gonna know that something's up. She's gonna this and that. I said, I don't care. Because I try to explain to them. I said, you're not only bringing flowers for her, you're bringing flowers for yourself. It's a little strange concept, but the idea is that as men, we do things for our family because that's what we do as men. It is not about appeasing her. It's not about making her feel good. It's not about trying to gain favor. It's not trying to have sex that night. It's because that's all like no more Mr. Nice Guy type behavior. You know, it's because as a husband, this is something that I do to bring peace and love into my home. It's important to me. And you won't believe the stories that I hear. I can't tell you how many times the guy has brought home flowers and the woman looks at them, she has a scowl on her face and slams them into the garbage can. Boom. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's rough.
And then he comes back to you on Monday, you know, we talk again. He's like, she threw them out. Da, da, da. I said, I don't care. You got to do it again next week. He brings them flowers again. And the third week. And by the fourth week, you know, she takes them and she doesn't say thank you or anything like that. She takes them and puts them in water. And by the fifth or sixth week, she's already thanking him and she puts them nicely in a vase and she's very appreciative. You know, so sometimes, you know, in order to, things can have gone so sour in a relationship that, you know, sometimes it could take time of constant love, like you said, and just choosing to give and be that type of person that, you know, your wife or your partner or your children, it can happen with children as well, turn around and realize that you mean no harm and that underneath all the fighting and the discord is actually the foundation of love and connection that you really want.
Yeah, and I think too, right? The flowers. It's not really like you said about the flowers, but it's the in your mind because you're gonna think about okay, I'm gonna go buy flowers, and you know what kind of flowers am I gonna buy? You know that kind of thought process goes into it. But I think in the meantime, though, there's other opportunities to think about how can I give, right? Because it's not about like okay, like oh, it's been 5 Fridays of flowers. Now, you know, I think there's a kind of a let's just say a heart change in the man as he's kind of going through and doing this that kind of like takes him through, because you know I think a lot of what I'm noticing on Twitter is that people will kind of like hang on to a thing, right? Like the flowers, like this is like some kind of like a magic bullet. It's like no, it's like this is the habit that kind of gets you thinking about other ways to give to your wife, and while you're kind of going through it, like you know, that's where I think that they kind of notice, right? Because that's really I've never experienced that, you know, where it's like I gave my wife some flowers and she threw them in trash. So it's like you know that's got to be, you know, you've probably had to be in a real bad place for it to get to that point, and you know. I don't.
Well, they don't come to me when everything is going well. They're not.
Yeah, and you know, and that's you would hope not, right? Like you know, they could come to like let's strengthen a marriage. But that's why I think what you talk about is so important, right? Because it's building great marriage. It's like you don't have to wait till the house is on fire to go and do these things. Like, you know, it's like being fit, right? Like you don't want to wait till you get the terminal illness to change your diet and exercise. Like if you did that now, your life would improve. But I think, you know, people I see on Twitter, it's like they get stuck on these like little things, and you know, part of it might be just the way it's set up, that's what generates things, and but that's why I like talking offline, because like, hey, like if we could really talk through some of these things, you know, it's not about the flowers, it's about the giving, and I guess maybe for the man to like start to learn how to give again, right? Because he probably stopped giving, right? Like that's
100%
probably what happened.
Yeah, everyone goes into that cycle. And I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, it's important, you know, there's all different ways of building a great marriage or connecting with your wife, one of which is acts of kindness or giving. Another one is expression through language, right? So I like to work with men on expressing gratitude towards their wife. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see every once in a while I have a tweet of like something that a man said or a woman says. Very important to express ourselves verbally, you know. And then there's intimacy, and that's another way that we give, right? How do we, you know, whether it's a back rub or whether it's, you know, the bedroom, whichever way it is, you know. And then there's emotional support, you know, learning how to listen is a huge component in being a good husband. I mean, it's very difficult. And also for a good wife, that actually one of the most challenging. You would think that women are good listeners, and sometimes they can be, but oftentimes it's very difficult for them to listen because they're so emotional that if you say something that they don't like, it ends up backfiring and you end up having to kind of hide what you were trying to say or pretend as if you didn't say it, or you don't want to hurt their feelings. So sometimes it's hard for women to learn how to listen. And, learning how to listen is a great component of being in a good marriage. So there's all different ways that we can, but the main thing that I talk about and that I think, you and I have shared is that we do these things because we want to be a good partner. We're not doing any, I'm learning how to listen because when I listen to you, it creates a great relationship between us and I become a better person.
Right.
I give you flowers because I'm stepping up my game as a man, just like I go to the gym, not because I'm trying to attract her to my muscles. I'm going to the gym because I feel better as a person, right? I feel better if I'm in shape. Yeah. And I give her compliments because a man naturally wants to give, like you said before. You barely can receive anything, right? Like what are you going to give me already? Right? My greatest pleasure is making you happy because that's what God is and that's what men are.
Yeah.
Right. That's my greatest pleasure. So when I give a compliment, I'm also doing it for me, not just for you.
Do you think, like, looking back from, like, just say 10 years ago as a snippet, that now you've kind of amplified on a lot of these things, and that's why the marriage is the best that it's ever been?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I know right now that when I'm upset at my wife, the first thing I do is I go to my gratitudes. I go immediately to gratitude. I'll write her some texts about. I'll fall into that space where I think about what a wonderful woman she is and what an incredible partner she's been to me all these years, and how much she's had to put up with with me. And I immediately fall into this space of, oh my gosh, like, I'm so thankful to you, and I'm so happy that you accepted my love and that you've stuck with me all these years, and look at all these amazing ways that you're showing up as a woman in my life.
That's beautiful, like, Dovid.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if it's New Testament, Old Testament, but it's whatever is true, whatever is good, whatever is lovely. Think upon these things, and it says that in the Bible. And I think that's a really because I think I was talking to my kids about that, because I can't stand complaining. Like, I really can't. Like, it's just I don't
pushes your buttons.
Yeah, it really does. So I was just telling my kids, like, hey, this is what this is what you want to think about, because it's very easy to slide or into, like, okay, she did this thing wrong, or they did this thing wrong, and now this and this and this, because I'm very good at finding things that are wrong or not good, and I could just go down and then now I'm worked up, right? And I've got myself worked up. And they could have no clue either, right? Like, they could have no clue, and now I've worked myself up. But to be able to train yourself like you did, of like, oh, like, I'm not feeling good. Okay, let me think about all of the good things that she does. Oh, yeah. And then that list is just, if you married her and you've been married and you had kids, you that list it just keeps on going and going, because you could just see like all the things that go. It's just like,
totally.
Is this really something that I'm going to be upset about? And I think that's great that you had that kind of those 4 or 5, I'll say, values to kind of like, oh, okay, you know what, this doesn't need on here. I'm going to go about my day. Maybe have a conversation about it lightly, like, hey, I just noticed this thing, and just something to notice, right? But the listening, man, I love talking to you, David, because the listening is that comes with the bank account, right? Like if I'm talking to a stranger, I'm not going to listen very much, because it's like, well, I'm not very invested in you, and but I'm invested in my wife, and she's invested in me. So when she speaks, or my kids speak, like, I'm invested in them. So I'm gonna listen because I'm invested in them. And so I kind of think. But if you're in a place where you're not listening, that I think that's broken. I think it kind of shows you, like, she's not listening to me because maybe I haven't invested in her to the way that I would like for her to listen. So it's that bank account that I think a lot of relationship people have talked about, like, hey, the bank account is on overdraft right now. So the listening might be a symptom of that.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. Listening requires the one of the most important. Listen, if you were to tell me about something that happened with you at work, there's different levels of listening, right? So, you want to talk about this, or is this like
yes, please, please. Okay.
Yeah. So there's different levels of listening. I can listen to a story that you're telling me, right? And if it's usually if it's my wife telling me the story, that takes a lot of effort on my part to listen. um, but then there's like listening to something that happened to you during the day, like so not just a story about somebody else, but like a little bit more personal, right? So it's something that happened to you during the day, right? Then I can listen to your feelings about something, right? That's a deeper level. So how it affected you, what's going on. I can talk to you about your personal, what's going on in your life personally. And then one of the deepest levels of what we call disclosure, which is a technical term in therapy. So these are like the 5 different levels of disclosure, would be when you're sharing something about me, right? So that's the hardest thing to listen to. Right? So it's much easier for me to listen to my wife tell me some story that happened to somebody else versus even some sort of story that happened to her. When she tells me a story that happened to her, the first thing I want to do is fix it, right? So that's already a little bit more challenging, right? Then if she's telling me how she's feeling, so her feelings may affect me. Like if my wife's feeling sad, so all of a sudden I'm feeling something like, oh my gosh, why is she feeling sad, right? But then even the lowest levels, if she's feeling upset at me, right? Now all of a sudden me listening is turned into this whole other thing. Like it's much more challenging to listen to somebody with empathy and patience and goodwill when she's actually talking to when the topic of conversation is how I screwed up and made her feel terrible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Then it's like I become a terrible listener, right? Or the first go to is no, I didn't, right? Defensiveness.
Right. Well, you did this.
Yeah, turn around, like blame, right? So you turn around, you blame her, right? There's all these things that come up immediately when, a second ago you were a great listener when she was telling about Sally and Sheila, right?
Yeah.
But now when she's talking about you're a terrible listener,
Yeah.
right? So that's something that I help people work on, learning how to, and that's a very masculine capacity for us to be able to absorb. And David Deida in his book, The Way of the Superior Man, doesn't necessarily talk about this particular point, but in general, his overall approach is similar to what I'm trying to say, in the sense that we have to learn how to absorb the energy of our wives, even the negative energy, especially the negative energy. And that's hard. When I was in my early 40s, I couldn't do that. As a matter of fact, I was the one in the early 40s that was putting out a lot of negative energy. I was the one trying to fix the relationship and trying to make things better and try to show how if we only behave this way, both of us, not just you, not just blaming, but both of us, things could be better, right? And if my wife had something like that to say, I would come up with reasons why that didn't make sense, and I was terrible.
Yeah.
And as you get older, you're capable. You're more and more capable of being able to absorb the blows, so to speak, and create a space for her to express herself and take responsibility for those parts which you can be responsible for in a vulnerable and real way. And it makes a huge shift in the relationship.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because that the things that you said, it's like, yeah, that sounds very familiar, David. Like, I was very, very intense, and like, nothing was my fault. It was like, hey, if we just fix this thing, or if we didn't spend this thing, or I just liked how you, even going back to how you kind of broke it down into the 4 phases, because that plateau phase that you spoke about, like that is very real. As a man from my 20s to now, I'm almost going to be 40. Like, you're trying to build, and you get very busy and you get pulled away. Like I think that I don't know if you have data on it, but that would, to me, I think, be the point where a lot of divorces come into play, right? Because it's like, hey, we were just in this honeymoon phase. What happened? And it's just like, well, no, you were busy building. You weren't giving like you did. Because in the honeymoon phase, it's easy to give, like you said, right? Everything is good.
Yeah.
It's
fun to
mutual,
give.
It's fun to give. It's mutual. But now you have those other stresses that come along, and if you're not careful, I think that plateau phase or period is a dangerous phase for a lot of marriages. And I think you just kind of putting it that way, I think it could help a lot of people. So I really hope people listen just for that. So I'll figure out get for that. But Yeah, everything you say is like, yeah, like I very much resonate with that. And now you're kind of going on into like you've raised um, kids and they're adults, married kids, or you still have kids in the house.
Well, I have six children, so the
Uh huh.
range is pretty. My
Uh huh.
oldest is 27,
Uh huh.
and my youngest is 13. So our little
Okay.
girl, she's 13, and yeah, my 13-year-old and 15-year-old are still in the house. Yeah.
Okay, because one of the things that I wanted to ask was, like my goal for my kids is for them to be married and to have great marriages. Like I think my parents had a good marriage, but with the information that we have and the connectivity that we have on, the access that we have that our parents didn't have, I think is something that you need to be humble about. I think, in my opinion, my parents didn't have a friend like you who could like talk about marriage, or
Uh-huh.
guys like me who could say or even point out the fact, like, because I saw in my parents' marriage too, when that stressful time when it was like, we were kind of like 10 years old and you're trying to like buy houses, things like that. Like you could see the stress
Sure.
happening, and
Oh yeah.
you wish they could have those tools. But now that you have your children, like, what are some things that you kind of want to impart on them so that they are, I don't know if it's just like your boys specifically, because I have boys and girls, but
Hmm.
you what is it, things that you say like that you would like them to do so they can be good husbands and wives.
Uh-huh. That's a great question. Um, Something which one of the gifts that my father gave me, which I've tried to impart to my children, is that who we are, especially as boys, and the truth is that boys learn this from a very young age. Um, I don't know if I'm going to ruffle any feathers. I don't know who's listening to this. I don't care. I'm just saying boys learn this from a very young age that they are actually above the relationship. And the higher above the relationship they can be, the more successful relationships they can have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very important lesson in life that your personhood, is actually above your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like when people are doing meditation or mindfulness. They always talk about in mindfulness. I don't know if you're familiar how you are with mindfulness, but one of the concepts they talk about is like having a third eye. And this third eye is like above looking down.
Mm-hmm.
And when a person can kind of connect to that third eye, they can look at their lives as an onlooker instead of a participant.
Mm-hmm.
I know this sounds a little weird, but
No,
it's
it makes
not
sense.
that
Yeah.
it's not that weird. So when I teach my boys how to be in a relationship, I always come from the perspective of we are not victims of our relationship. We are willing participants in the relationship, but we exist outside of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And what that basically means is don't allow the ongoings of the back and forth, the normal dynamic, to affect how you feel about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that approach, you become impervious to the inevitable pain that occurs in any type of relationship, whether it's a friendship or
Mm-hmm.
between you and a boss, or you and a wife and a woman. And kids learn this. Boys learn this from a very young age. My kids, they see the way that my wife and I interact, and they see how I softball catch a lot of the things that she throws at me, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And sometimes I'll wink at them or something like that at my sons, and they
Mm-hmm.
they can see what's going on. They can see that mommy's in a bad mood, and Tati and Daddy was able to kind of like sidestep her anger or appease her or acquiesce to something which normally I wouldn't say yes to, but I'm doing it for the sake of the relationship. They see all that dynamic occurring in the home for the sake of maintaining the peace and for the sake of showing love. And when they grow up with that type of environment where they see that, instead of me getting defensive or angry, or there be coldness inside the house or bitterness or you know uh, conflict,
Tension. Yeah.
tension and conflict, right? They see how we kind of, you know daddy's on a mission. Daddy's on a mission to raise a family, have a wife, raise children and grandchildren. That's my mission,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes I got to take one for the team in order to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's not actually called taking one for the team. That's what I want for myself in order to be successful on my mission.
Right.
So they
It's
seem
not a sacrifice because this is what I want. So this is what's part of playing the game, I guess.
part of playing the game, right?
Yeah.
Very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And when boys see that, you're giving them this invaluable tool that they can bring to their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite, like I said before, the opposite is also true. They see that, that I have my cutoffs, and they can feel that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I tweeted about this the other day about my daughter. She's my 13-year-old, and she's getting into her teenage years. And I said, I love, the tweet said something like this: I love the fact that my daughter views me as this cuddly pushover on one hand.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, when I put my foot down, she knows the game is over.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
I love that.
Uh-huh.
And it's not like it's not like she looks at me only in one way. She doesn't
Right.
just see me as like the authority figure, and when I walk in the room she gets all nervous. No.
Right.
When I walk in the room, if I left my keys on the table or if I forgot something, she'll make a joke or she'll tease me or this and that, or she'll say, "Oh, I can if you say no to this, I'll just ask mommy." Like she she's like totally cool like that. I love that.
Uh-huh.
And on the other hand, when her and her mother are fighting about something, or when she's starting to show a little disrespect, and I like this,
Mm-hmm.
she's immediately like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, dad is not playing right now. Yeah.
Anyway, what do you think about what I'm saying?
Well, I think I kind of say it that way too. It's like I'll say, Dad, you can play with daddy, but daddy doesn't play. like we'll play, and I want to be cuddly daddy to my sons and my girls, but know that there's certain lines that don't get crossed. You're being disrespectful to your mom. No. You're complaining. No. Like this is I'm dead serious right now, and you know it. And so there is that fine balance. But I think also just going back to what you were saying about being above the relationship, because it makes it easier, right? It's like one of those things where it's easy to give advice to other people when you're not in it than when you're in it. So I think it's kind of having that same attitude of like, if I can teleport 1,000 feet above myself right now, I can tell myself what is the thing to do, and I can see the whole the whole big picture. So I think there's a tremendous value in that. And then so as far as like dating for your kids, did you find like they were naturally attracted to the right kind of people, or like were you because they're gonna make mistakes and things like that, but was it helpful? Did you see? Because I think for me, I always think back, like I had a picture of a good marriage from my parents. I'm very grateful to my parents for that. And then so when it's time for me to date, I was very selective because I didn't want to waste. I wasn't going to waste my time. I'm not just dating to date. I didn't have the money to do that anyway. I was really young, but like it had to be towards building something. And I understand that I was really different even from my peers. Like my peers, they went and dated and did that whole thing. So and then I think in the culture that we live in now too, it's not. It's not very conducive to, I don't know, like men like me and you who are like, hey, I'm dating, or I'm not even dating for marriage. I'm trying to find if you're the one that I'm going to marry, and if not, then no. So I don't know if your kids kind of ran into that issue.
I mean, we raise our children. I'm Orthodox Jewish, so in general, our dating looks very different than just like I was brought up like regular American, like everybody else. Eventually, in my early 20s, I became more observant of my religion. But my kids are raised, that the dating has a purpose. Like my kids are raised that they're going to get married and have kids. That's how they're raised. Of course, they can choose to do whatever they want. But in terms of how we raise them to, find a girl and or woman, or for my daughter, that she'll find a man and they will get married and have children. And dating is for that purpose. There's not not that I don't see the joy and the fun of casual dating. Of course, I get it. Like,
Right.
obviously,
Yeah.
it's a thrill and it's enjoyable. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
denouncing that at all. Um, but that's not like part of anything that we raise them with.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about that at all. So yeah, I think that makes a big difference for them because they recognize that, male female relationships, the purpose of which is to find a life partner and to establish a home.
Mm-hmm.
That's the why they actually interact with members of the opposite gender. Otherwise, there's no real reason. I know it sounds crazy today, but other than like in a work environment or something like that,
Yeah.
there's no real reason to be hanging out with boys for my daughter or girls for my sons.
Right. Yeah. And I guess, to me that sound crazy, but to some people that sound, really crazy. Like I went and hung out with Tyler and a bunch of guys. It's like if there was women there, I was like, there's no reason for me to be here. That's just, that's putting yourself into trouble. And like you think about like, teenage boys who are they hanging out with, you go to, your sports practice and then you go hang out with your teammates after. Like,
Oh yeah,
like if you were hanging around girls, it was because you were interested romantically in a girl, or
usually.
if you
Yes.
talked on the phone, like I never talked on the phone for an extended period of time with a girl who I wasn't romantically interested in. Like
Right.
I'm like what am I gonna have a 1 hour conversation with?
And if you if you did end up doing it, at least the ones that I remember is that you weren't interested at all. Like and most likely she was interested in you, because
Right.
otherwise, why would she be there?
Right. That, and then it's like, or like, hey, you had some kind of school project, and so like we're
Yeah.
kind of forced to by circumstances, but
Yeah.
in outside of that, like, yeah, I don't see
Yeah.
what the point is for that. And so was that helpful? So did you have experiences where you're like, I don't want these experiences for my kids, so my faith and setting this up for them is a way to help my, because the mission is to
Oh, yeah.
have, because I think about that too, like the church that I go to, it's like, hey, I want kids that are going to be I don't know, just good kids that I'd want my kids to be around, like,
Yeah.
and I think choosing your church or your synagogue are ways of doing that.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, my wife more than me, she is very strict on the marriage thing. Like she's very strict on some of her past experiences with, mainly with me before we were religious. That's probably caused her the most trauma that she's had. You know, because I met my wife when I was 17 and we both weren't religious at all, observant at that time. And then I kind of went through this transformation in my early 20s, and then she did as well. And then we got married when I was 24, and 7 years later. And so we knew each other for quite a long time. We went through a lot of different stuff together. And so she doesn't want that for our kids. She doesn't like the confusion and, all the craziness, the heartache and the breakups and the pain and the emotional, especially for women, the emotional scarring that occurs. And I see this online all the time. So many men are upset that by the time they find the woman who they want to spend the rest of their life with, sometimes, not, I don't know if it's oftentimes, many times, all the time, but I'm just going to use the word sometimes, she's gone through so many trials and tribulations romantically that there's such emotional scarring that it ends up tainting his relationship with her. So he finds that he found a woman, but because of what she's been through, oftentimes through no fault of her own, it's just that you play with fire, you're going to get burnt. That he has to end up kind of healing those wounds, and they get upset. And again, I'm not saying that they rightfully so or not rightfully so, but it's troublesome to them that they're finding themselves in. And I'm not saying putting any judgment on it. Like they may be the guy who does that to a different girl two or three times. Right?
Yeah, you were part of that cycle, or you that has 3 other women before, and now
Exactly.
that you found one that you are interested in. Well, she had met a couple guys like you before.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not putting anybody's innocent here or something like that. But those things, those scars that occur are real, and
Mm-hmm.
they will come out in life. And so my wife is like very strict on our kids, hopefully. And we don't control our kids, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just our choice the way we educate them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that we can influence them and teach them, so this is part of what she imparts to them.
Um, I was reading. So the culture to me it like the word toxic gets thrown around, toxic masculinity, femininity. But to me, I see the culture and it's toxic. The culture itself. So
Hmm.
what I mean is this: like I was reading like a biography of Corey Ten Boom. She was in Poland or something like that, and
Okay.
she goes into concentration camps also. But she was talking about when she was a little girl, she had asked, she was maybe like, I don't know, 8, 10 years old, and she had asked her dad about sex, and he didn't say
Okay.
anything. And then they were on the train, and then he gets off the train and he says, "Pick up the suitcase," and then she tries to lift it, and she says, "Oh, it's too heavy." And then so he was like, "That's right, it's too heavy for you." Same thing with sex. This is too heavy for you to pick up at this time. So
Wow.
I'm gonna carry it for you.
Okay.
And so I'm my kids are a little younger than my oldest is younger than yours. But with the culture, what it is, did you have the sex talk with your kids later? Because the thing is, it's just like with smartphones and stuff like that. Like I don't want them to get educated from their friends' smartphones or whatever. But I
Sure.
also want to preserve my kids' innocence for
Right.
as long as possible. Like I don't want to give them things that's like this they're not ready for it. But the culture is pushing these things earlier and earlier. We're
Right.
talking 1930s Poland. Like pace of life was
Right.
much more different. There was
Oh yeah.
no even Playboy magazines back then,
No.
and now we're
No.
dealing with magnitudes of that even more. So,
Right.
what are your thoughts on that kind of talk for your kids? Because you
Well,
want to prepare them for dating and things too, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, it's a really tough. It's a. I find that there's oftentimes all these different extremes in this particular topic.
Mm-hmm.
There are men who, once the kid shows signs of having like a pubic hair, will take out some beer, show them a magazine, hang out with them,
Mm-hmm.
talk about how gorgeous women are, and like have this incredibly bonding, like friend type relationship with their son.
Mm-hmm.
Like just like right out of the gate, they're like their wingman, as you call it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're cheering them on for every date. They know all the details, right? And then there's fathers that are more pulled back, where they don't really talk much about it. They kind of try to set a good example in the home, but they're not really that connected. So I see the extremes, and I don't know which one grows up to have a more
Right.
normal, self-esteem and stuff like that. I didn't do any research, and I don't really know. These are
Mm-hmm.
just things that I see. You know, for me, this is what I like to do personally. Um, I'm not a huge communicator, so I'm not the dad that cracks the beer open and says, "Oh, look at that girl's ass" or
Mm-hmm.
something like that with my
Mm-hmm.
kids. I don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't strike me as a type either.
However, I don't like to pretend that it's not there. And I don't want to alienate my son from his feelings while I'm in his presence.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't like the duality. So let's just say we're watching a movie together and there's a beautiful girl on the screen,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So I will say things like, "Oh, wow, she's really pretty,"
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
I'll say, "Oh, no wonder he fell in love with her,"
Mm-hmm.
or if my daughter's in the room, I'll say, "Oh, maybe they'll get married."
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I don't want it to be the pink elephant in the room, that it's like they have their own private reality about it, and mom and dad never ever talk about it or broach that topic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I'm not going to be grotesque about it. I'm not going to be trivial about it, and I'm not going to turn it into like a boys club or a slut fest or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So that's like on one level. I like to bring it out in the open because I know teenage boys. I mean, my gosh, I remember when I was a teenager, like you
Yeah.
couldn't,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
all they think about,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want it to be like their experience and then dad is like nowhere to be seen and dad's
Yeah.
pretending like it doesn't exist.
Right.
On the other hand, so therefore I will talk about it. I'll make jokes about it. I'll like, um, let them as they grow older. I'll ask my son, "Oh, did you think that this woman was a pretty woman, or wow, that's a pretty woman, or something like that?" So he sees that I'm acting normally about it.
Yeah.
And then also when it comes to the sex talk itself, I like to allow. I let my kids know that their feelings are natural, normal, not to be ashamed of their feelings, that it's a healthy thing for a boy to be attracted to girls,
Right.
to get aroused, to, feel the need to take care of himself in that way. These are all normal things that all boys go through, that I went through this, that everybody goes through this. And I also let them know, I said, one day you're going to have a wife and you and her will have, intimacy, and this will become part of who you are as a person, and that we take this energy right now and we focus it on, school, sports, development, this and that. Right. And eventually at a young age, I like my kids to get married. My oldest got married when he was 20, started the dating process when he was 23. So he got married when he was 24. It's pretty young in today's circles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and we're bothering our other kids to also get married. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And they're actively dating and
some of them are still building their careers, which I would I would wish that they get more on track. But I think what's happening in the general population is affecting even the religious communities as well. That people are getting married older and stuff like that.
Right, because they're going to college and extending that to grad school, and then going to start their jobs, and then that's 3 to 4 years. And so I get it. One of the things that I think was so destructive about divorce though too is, like, I think about it like, the generations reach down and help the generations that come after it. Like my grandpa did some things for me that were like, oh, I see what he did for me. And with divorce, the family gets kind of broken and there's torn. So I think that there's less of the generations reaching back to help bring up the next ones, because those right. ties and that trust has been broken. And so there's a lot of this like like kids who are your kids' age, who are like, well, I got to build myself up because there's no help coming from grandparents or whatever, or some nobody's gonna help me to buy a house, and now they're crazy, ridiculous. Like, it would be irresponsible for me to start a family like this, which I understand.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole podcast. I'd love to come back another time and talk to you about that. For down. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it's such a shame. Look, I can never. It's hard for me to talk about it because I'm not going to take responsibility for somebody else's life in that way. Like I can't tell somebody get married young and it'll all work out. Like I can't say that. On so many different levels. On an emotional level, maybe they're not mature enough, or a financial level, maybe it'll kill this guy's dream of becoming a professor that he always wanted to go to grad. I can't take that responsibility. On the other hand, I have very strong feelings that it's usually the marriage, in my opinion, just speaking for myself and from my experience, it's the marriage that builds the man. And until we get married, we oftentimes can't really find ourselves. It doesn't mean that we can't have a good career, but in so many levels of your life. So whether it's emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, religious-wise, it's the marriage. It's the drive that we gain through having the responsibility of taking care of a woman and, of course, children, that is the impetus for us to become much bigger and better in all these different ways than we could have possibly been without it.
On our own. Well, and there's the thing, too, right, of like, hey, I waited till I was almost 30 to have kids. It's like, man, I wish I would have started earlier. Like
Uh-huh.
there's that. It's like, okay, I was different, but I think about it now. It's like I can't push my kids into, like, I'm gonna encourage my kids to get married and married young, but I think for me it's my responsibility. It's like I it's up to me if I want that to provide the conditions that help them to realize that. So if that's,
Right.
helping in a way financially with them building a house, or just, helping them build great financial habits now in the way that we
Yeah.
educate our kids. So, by the time they're 18, they're not, how I was when I was 18. They would have the things that I know up to that point when they're 18, when they're ready
Oh
to go
yeah.
out. And then, building a different kid. So education's a whole different thing. But David, man, it's always such a treat to really speak to you, man. Like you speak on things at such a level that just like, it's so good. And I don't mean that
Thank
in
you.
like the good. I mean in like the goodness of like God good. Like these are things that are so helpful because it's so easy. Like I'm a natural tit for tat kind of guy. Like you did this, I'm gonna get back at you, and like
Right.
it's kind of the way I've been wired. And but as God transforms me and having conversations with you, it's like, yes, I want to be a better husband. Yes, being a better husband helps my wife and my kids and helps the people around me, just like it does, you being a good man to your wife and your
Yeah.
kids and your grandkids now. Like, well, I want good people to be around. So it's such a pleasure to always speak to you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Of course. And I always appreciate conversing with you as well. I just want to point something out. Do you mind if I point something out about
Yes,
you that I
please, go ahead,
noticed?
please,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. So I feel like you, I can imagine that tit for tat thing would be a challenge for you because you have such a sharp sense of humor. I see it on Twitter all the time. And with that, like, incredible insight is like, it's like a double, I can imagine that it would be a double-edged sword because you like immediately go right for like the weak point and you know how to like exploit it into something really funny,
Yeah.
but I can imagine that same character trait, of being able to be so insightful could be challenging the other way as well, where you could see that little crack in the armor
Yes. Yeah.
and then use it to be like, hey, wait a second, what's going on over here?
And
Would
now
you say that that's somewhat true, like what I'm
yeah,
saying?
it's very true because it's like, I see what's gonna hurt, and then I'm gonna make it hurt, but then I'm gonna make it funny, and then it's gonna hurt even more because now everybody's laughing. So I had to be very careful with the things that I say. So that
And well,
sometimes
see, you have very sharp noticing skills. Like that's like part of what your humor is really about. Like you'll point out things that people don't see, and along with it, see one of the things that I've learned to do as I've gotten older is to stop noticing. Like I have to take that noticing characteristic of mine and put it on the back burner, because if I choose to sit there and noticing everything, I'm going to drive myself crazy.
yeah, yeah.
And so like things that I've done, like I don't look at credit card bills anymore, I don't look at bank statements anymore, I don't look at, I don't care about my wife's time, how she spends her time. When I was focused on those things, or when I included those things as part of like what I did, it's fodder for discord.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Everything that's true, because everything for me is fodder. It's like, oh, what I got here? Scroll through Twitter. Oh, what do we got here? And
Exactly.
And the thing too, I try to be very aware of that because I don't want to come across mean spirit. Like I want to find the thing to make fun of something for the sake of making fun of it. So like I'll make fun of Christians. I'll make fun of like whoever, because I don't want to be like the mean. So I do try to temper that, because sometimes it's like, hey, I'm just trying to find the funny thing here.
Oh
And,
yeah,
like, all
I
I
think
do
you're
is be funny.
hysterical.
Yeah,
I think you're
yeah.
really funny.
I appreciate that, but there is the part of me. It's like, oh, like I don't want to be mean, and I like I don't want to be so crude either, because I could be crude, and so it's like, okay, like finding that balance of like just
Totally.
towing that line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one thing for like, eventually you'll learn to channel it. So like, when it comes to making jokes on Twitter, you're going to have like this whole persona that I love and I think is really funny, But then eventually, hopefully you'll be able to say, okay, when I'm looking this way at my wife and my children, that volume button just goes all the way
Oh,
down.
yeah.
Like I don't even see. I've trained myself. I'm not even looking in that direction. Like I don't see anything wrong. I only see the beauty and the niceness and the kindness and the love and like.
Yeah.
But I have a good friend of mine who's also very sharp like you. Like he has like this. I mean, he's hysterical. Like it's so funny to be around him. But I've spoken to his wife, and she says it's funny when you're over there, but when he's at home, it's not funny.
Yeah. It's like, all right, stop. It's like, okay, and I think that's one of the fun things about Twitter for me. It was a place because like
Right.
I've had this conversation where it's like at work I would do that stuff at work, and then so like now that I was at home, it's like, well, the kids don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm not gonna say this to them. Or my wife is like busy changing a diaper or whatever. Like she doesn't want to hear it. So Twitter was a blessing for on that. And it's like, I was able to find people to bust balls with. Because that's really what it comes down to. I like busting balls. Like bust mine, you bust your. That's kind of like what friends do. So it's been really fun.
Yeah.
But I appreciate having you on, Dovid. Is there any kind of classes? This will actually come out this Friday. So do you have anything in the irons that you wanted to say? Hey, I got this coaching thing coming up or class coming up.
Well, we're going to be starting up the master classes again. So if anybody wants to sign up for my email list, they'll be informed of some of the master classes. Those are really great. So we'll talk about anything. We can talk about how to be a good communicator, a good listener, how to show kindness in your relationship, how to intimacy, sex, like how to schedule and have a great sex life with your wife. And so those classes are free that you just sign up on my email list and then you'll get a notification. You can join on Zoom and they usually go for about an hour and they're a lot of fun. So, well, I'll keep people informed. If they want, they can just sign up on my email list. That's the best way to keep informed.
Perfect. He is Dovid Feldman. You can find him on Twitter at Dovid Feldman. That is DOVIDFELDMAN. Same for his website, dovidfeldman.com. He is my friend. He's helping people building great marriages. Dovid, thanks you so much for coming on today, my friend.
Thank you, Joel. It's a pleasure. Talk to you later.
Always.